On today's show, we are delving into the game of the most physical and violent forward in the 2025 NHL draft, Brady Martin.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about Brady Martin, a big riser here late in the 2025 draft class. And I'll be being joined here by Mark from NHL Draft Prospects to delve into his game. And Mark's seen him live a couple of times this season. And we both love just the physicality and skill he brings to the ice. And he's, just been like fantastic down the stretch, whether it's the production in the OHL, the violence and scoring at the U18 Worlds. This guy is convincing NHL teams, and you can bet that NHL scouts are going to be licking their lips at the idea of picking him in the back half of the top 10 on draft day. So we'll be digging into his tools, his profile in the first segment. Then we'll move on to look at the mental attributes and how the different aspects in his game work together to support one another. And finally, we're going to look ahead a little bit at our predictions and projections, where he's going to go on draft day, which team would be the best fit for him, and what his NHL ceiling is at the end of the day. So let's just get started into the episode here. So thanks so much for joining me, Mark. How's it going?
I'm good. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sebastian.
So happy to have you on. So let's just dive into it here with Brady Martin, a 6 foot, 175 pound right shot center. And that profile does not really paint the picture of how he plays the game. You see that and you're like, oh, small center. This is not a small center. He plays like he's 6'6" and 250 pounds. He is a freight train of a player. And in the words of an NHL executive interviewed by my colleague Cam Robinson, would be one of the best hitters in the NHL if he were playing there today. He has a lot going for him in terms of physicality, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know what? This is a player that when he hits, he's hitting to put you through the boards. It's not to, pin you up against the wall. He hits with authority. And like you said, he's a freight train on the ice. And once he gets actually a little bit bigger, he's going to be a lot of trouble for NHL teams in the future.
He really will be. And it's not just the physicality and hitting that he brings to the table. He scored 33 goals and 72 points in 57 games this season to go along with 68 penalty minutes. He was playing with the Sioux Greyhounds and had a really long leash to do whatever he wanted, basically, in the offensive zone. My colleague Mitch Brown does a bunch of data tracking, and what he found on Brady Martin is just that the Sioux just allows him to do whatever he wants to. So there's a really high degree of attempts and a really high rate of trying things. The actual efficacy hasn't always been there this year, but Martin's really been exploring the periphery of his possible tools. Basically, he's really exploring what he can do with his toolkit, with the puck on his stick, and his creativity as a puck handler, the playmaking flashes, the scoring ability. These are all things that really shone later on in the season, especially when things started to come together a bit more, because he plays a bit of a chaotic brand of hockey, and he was a bit reactionary maybe earlier on in the campaign, but as he settled in as the year wore on, that controlled chaos was just way too overwhelming for most defenses that he faced. And that remained the case also at the U18 Worlds, where he scored 11 points and 3 goals in 7 games for Team Canada, including 29 penalty minutes. This guy was getting involved, and he was just playing a role that no one else on the team really brought in terms of that rampant physicality. He was second on team scoring behind only Braden Coots, who was the inverse to Brady Martin, as he logged 0 penalty minutes at that tournament. But together, they brought a whole lot of variety for Team Canada. But let's dive into the tools here a little bit for Brady Martin. And we've been talking about it a lot. Let's kick it off with the best element, that physicality. What makes it just so special, Mark?
Yeah, you know what? The main aspect of his game is definitely the physical component. He is dangerous when he's on the ice, and it was against Slovakia, I think, where he put a player out. Actually, the player returned, which was nice, but he got a 10-minute misconduct for his hit, and it was actually a clean hit, shoulder to shoulder. But with the force and the violence that he hit that player, it you know, unfortunately, they gave him a 10-minute misconduct for it. But yeah, and you know what? He's learned how to control it a little bit. And you were talking about the evolution of his game. He's evolved as the season progressed. Like I said, I saw him early on live, and then in the playoffs, and it was a changed player where he kind of started to understand his role on the ice a little bit better, and he was creating time and space, slowing the play down, using teammates more. But yeah, that physicality. I mean, you can't teach that in a player. Either you have it or you don't.
Absolutely. And I mean, like with Martin as well, I think that there's like such a strong foundation for a power game at the NHL level here. He doesn't have the biggest frame in the world, but again, with how he plays on the ice, he really is just built for a power style role. And he brings so much pace, incessantly trying to prod at defenses to get to the middle of the ice. He's a very middle driven kind of player, and he loves playing inside contact. He's a guy that seeks it out rather than tries to evade contact. And that's something I think is going to help him a lot in terms of progressing this style up levels once he faces pro competition in a couple of years' time. And he's a really tricky puck handler as well. I think the handling is perhaps a slightly unheralded aspect in his game. He's a really, really deft puck handler, and he loves to also kind of bait defenders into poke checks, curl the puck around them, exploit the triangle as well. He's a very creative player with the puck on his stick. And when you combine that with that physicality in terms of like entertainment value, I'm not sure a single player in this year's class, apart from maybe Carter Bear, can fully compete, because like it's just pure carnage on the ice. But let's talk about the shot a little bit as well, because he has one of the better or hardest shots in this year's draft class as well. It's not like quite Anton Frondel level in terms of like pure power generation, but in terms of like the physical frame, Martin has a lot more growing potential as well down the stretch, where you might see the power behind that shot take a couple steps in the coming years, whereas Frondel is kind of maxed out in terms of, I think, what his body can produce in terms of shot power. So Martin has some real like growth potential as well as a power play one-time option. I've seen some wicked bombs as well. Have you seen a couple like wild goals from him this year as well in terms of the shot ability?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? The shot is actually lethal. Like he's got a very powerful shot, and there's been multiple times, and I have it actually on some of my scouting reports where he just he can beat a goalie one on one. You don't get that too often in a player where he can literally when the goalie is waiting for him to shoot and he beats the goalie one on one, and that's what Brady Martin does. He can beat goalies one on one, and he's got that the layers in his shots that he can, and use. And he's middle driven, like you said. He's not afraid of driving into the danger areas. And so you can get a lot of goals up tight as well. So you got to love that in a player. Any kind of prospect who is middle driven and has a great shot is going to be a big target for an NHL team for sure.
And the skating ability is something that caught my eye a little bit this year, because it's not the cleanest of strides. He doesn't have all that much depth or stride extensions, but because he works so incredibly hard and there's a very high stride rate, he gets from A to B relatively quickly. I've found it's just never the prettiest or most like fluid kind of motion, but I found that like, and especially later on in the campaign, I didn't think that like his movement was like holding him back on the ice either, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? Like you said, he doesn't have that stride extension, the long stride, like a smooth skater like say Matthew Schaefer. However, he does get around relatively quick, and he does have some really good stops and starts. Like his acceleration is decent, but I think that that's something that you can kind of hem out as he develops, and something that you can kind of work on. So I'm not too scared about his skating. At best, right now, he'd be an average NHL skater, but there is room for growth in that department. So I don't think that's going to hold him back too much.
I fully agree. And finally, to wrap up this first segment, we have the passing ability. And this is something I think that also has some real growth potential in his game. He didn't have the most offensive support this year in the Sioux, so he was often, I think, trying to do a lot on his own as well, a lot of improvisation, trying to just dangle through entire defenses on his own in like solo incursions. But when he progresses in coming seasons and hopefully has more teammates that can like support him in like complex, creative, like offensive rotations and finding little pockets of space, I think the playmaking ability will be able to grow a little bit there as well, because especially the flashes at the U18 Worlds were fantastic in terms of his connective passing off the rush, layering in deception and no looks, and using his eyes and his hips to deceive defenders and drag them one direction in order to pass in the other. I've seen a lot of growth in like the maybe like proactive elements in the passing game with him.
Absolutely. And like you said, the U18s was a good example of that. He had 8 assists in 7 games. And he definitely, since the beginning of the season, that's one thing that I would say that he really improved upon was his playmaking. His passing got a lot better. And from, like I said, I saw him early on in the season and then in the playoffs. And he did, slow the play down. He was creating time and space. He was looking for other options. And that's exactly what you want to see in a player is that they kind of, evolved, I guess, their game. And he definitely did that. So that's a bonus in Brady Martin's case.
It absolutely is. And I think a lot of this growth also has to do with his intelligence. He's a really clever player, and we'll be digging into that a bit more in the next segment. But first, we have a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep things going here in the second segment by delving into the habits, the intelligence here with Brady Martin and how his different tools combine together. And I think we have to start off with just how his physicality influences the rest of his game, both offensively and defensively. What are perhaps like two pros and one con to how his physicality have impacts? Because I think there are like quite a lot of ripple effects of just how chaotic his game can be, right?
Yeah, you know what? He did learn to control it a little bit better as the season progressed. Like I said, when he forechecks, he is going to be a menace because defensemen are going to react. They're going to kind of get a little scared if he's coming in hard. And there's a few goals where I showed it where he would knock a player off the puck and then he'd get into an open position and he'd score a goal. So that is a pro. At times though, he can put himself out of play. So that's a con. If he sometimes the easy play is there and he'll try to, run someone basically where he could have probably just, taken a puck away, given that, what is expected of him from the opposing players. Like they're kind of, worried that he's going to hit them. So they sometimes would give up the puck easily and he'll still try to kind of, hit them too hard and whatnot. So I think that, if you can just kind of choose and pick his placement, I guess, in terms of, when to hit and when not to hit and take the puck, I think he'd be a lot better off.
Yeah, and I think like defensively as well, kind of building off of that is using his stick perhaps a bit more as his primary tool rather than his body. Because when you use your body as your primary defensive tool, whether you're a forward or a defenseman, you have to commit your weight in order to really have an effect. Whereas that can take you out of play if you're facing an agile winger who can skip past you. And as we mentioned, Brady Martin's agility is not his biggest strength in his toolkit. I've seen that a couple times this season where he tries to just like close in a gap to try to like contain play, but then a quick little maneuver and he's left way behind, and then it's like a 5-on-4 situation. So definitely those situations where just using his stick to angle players towards the boards and also realizing that he doesn't have to be the play killer every single time. He can try to shepherd the opponent towards a teammate or a defenseman on his team to kill the play instead, rather than taking on that onus on his own shoulders for every single play. But in terms of that offensive game, I think that the physicality and that inside contact game have had really big effects on his playmaking and handling as well. He's able to retain possession in really tight little situations situations. When he's getting bumped by an opponent, it doesn't matter. You're seeing other skilled players at this age. If they're even touched with a feather, they can lose possession with the puck, right? Where everything has to work perfectly in combination in order to hold on to possession. Martin is the opposite. It's kind of just glued to his stick, and he kind of his bumper carts around the offensive zone, gets hit by multiple guys. He hits other guys when he's on puck as well, but he's able to hold on to possession and dangle around some guys. And that playmaking as well, because he is so physical and looks to initiate contact. He has a gravitational pull on opponents. They want to close in that space. They want to constrict him a little bit. And in doing so, they open up gaps behind them. And he's able to slip pucks like underneath sticks. And he's a guy that I think has a lot more room to grow as well in terms of exploring how much he can create as a playmaker through that physicality and through that gravitational effect with the puck on a stick in the offensive zone. But I wanted to ask you, of all of his like IQ related habits, is there something that has like stood out to you as like underrated this season, of something he does like super well but hasn't been getting all that much acclaim for?
Yeah, like, the one thing, his puck protection, like you said, is really good, and he can kind of fend off players that way. And when he does that, and like along the wall or even in the high danger areas, he'll find one of his teammates in an open passing lane, and he'll dish it off, which is kind of surprising at times. I'll see him fighting off players, and I think, okay, he's going to lose the puck here, and then he dishes it off to a teammate that's in and around the area. So like you said, using that, F1, F2, F3, and he kind of uses his players. Now, there are times that he tries to do it on his own. Like you said, the Sioux kind of gave him a long leash and let him, experiment and things like that. But I don't have a problem with that, because it kind of allows a player to understand that, what he can do and what he can't do. And I thought by the end of the season, he was using his teammates more, and that puck protection along the wall, and, able to find players uh, in the periphery, I guess, and then create scoring chances, which was really nice. So I really liked his involvement in that department.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that makes Martin one of the more unique prospects in this year's draft is his combination of high end compete and high end creativity. Those two things just blend together so wonderfully in the offensive zone. And as we've been saying all episode, he's so middle driven. He seeks out that contact, but he's so creative as well in those puck touches he has in tight. And as the year progressed, he had like a lot more sequences that I caught of making, just as you were kind of saying, in tight areas, making very composed decisions as well, and finding creative little solutions to relieve pressure rather than just trying to like get the Hail Mary play every single time that he's going into the offensive zone. And this is these are the habits that he has to grow in order to progress his skill to the NHL level eventually. And as a player who is probably like what, a year or two out from playing NHL minutes in terms of like his physicality, I don't think he's all that far off, right?
No, you know what? He's probably one of the closer ones that will make the jump to the NHL. He's got that pro style game already. And I think that if he gets a little bit bigger, works on his skating, and you got to remember he's locked in at 180 pounds, 6 feet. I think that if maybe if he grows an inch and maybe gets to like 190, 195, I mean this is going to be a kid that is going to be a menace on the ice for sure. So yeah, I think he's closer than most in this draft class. And I mean, there's still room to grow. Like he's a young, player. March, I think, is his birthday, 2007. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited to see how he progresses for sure.
Absolutely. It's going to be very exciting to see. And lastly, for my last question for you here for the second segment is we broached a little bit how he was quite reactive to start the year, but that his chaos became a lot more controlled later in the season. What elements do you think really supported that shift?
I think that he understood that, at the beginning there was a lot of turnovers, losing pucks and puck battles and stuff like that. And that, you have teammates on the ice, and that you need to, use the surrounding, players that are on the ice. And I think that U18s kind of displayed that he evolved. And I really like that he started to kind of, look off and seek players on his team that he could use as, buffers, I guess, when he was in trouble.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up here for the second segment. In the last one, we're going to look ahead at where he might go on draft day, which teams would be good fits, what his ceiling and floor are in the NHL, and which NHL players remind us of his style of play. All that coming up after these messages from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here and let's just kick things off immediately with where he's going to go on draft day in terms of range. What are we talking about here? How high do you think that this player could go on draft day?
Oh, you know what? He's got a pretty good range. I think that, he's climbed up the boards a lot on a lot of the rankings recently, and especially because, like I said, of his development throughout the year and his play at the U18s. Like that just kind of showed everyone that this is a gamer and that he's got some offensive upside. So, you could go anywhere from, 5 to 15. I don't see him slipping now. I'd say 5 to 10 probably is his range right now. You're looking at a middle six for sure, probably a really, really good second line center. Now, he does have that versatility that he could probably play on the wing as well. He's that kind of player. You could pretty much put him anywhere on a line and he will succeed. So that's where I see his range.
I agree. Like I jotted down like 6 to 11. I think he's going to be in that back half of the top 10, and if he falls beyond that, it will not be for very long. Like
No.
he's going to get snapped up, and absolute worst case scenario, a team's going to trade up for him in like the 12 to 13 range if he's available there. I can't really see him slipping further than that. But in terms of the NHL ceiling, we talked about this a little bit already here. I think I see a guy who can reach the height of like a very physical second line center with the wicked shot that can be used as a power play one time threat, good handling and good playmaking, who just supports his line mates by being like the best F1 on the team
Oh,
and just punishing opponents night in, night out, right?
Oh, totally agree. I mean, this is a player that, yeah, you would. He's built for playoffs. Like this is a
Oh,
playoff
yeah.
player. Like you know
Yeah.
what? And every team they love to see players who can play that rough style and still put up points. And like you said, power play. He could play on the wall. He could play the bumper. Like I mean, this is a kid that you can stick him anywhere. And there's no way that an NHL team is going to pass on him, too late in this draft for sure. And given the fact that he succeeded so well at the U18s, I think that he's going to go really high, and that team's going to be really, really happy when they have Brady Martin on their team.
Yeah, I fully agree. And like also to like build on that physicality element with this player, he has farm strength. This is a kid
Oh,
who grew up on a farm, right?
yeah.
This hay bale kind of strength. Like he might not be the biggest guy, but he definitely has that wicked power. I think in terms of floor in the NHL, like this is a pretty much guaranteed NHLer. Like he could probably play like bottom six checking minutes as soon as next year on like a lower down the standings team, if they wanted to play him there. But I think one of the concerns I have in terms of his higher floor is that I think there's potentially a chance that he just kind of like ends up very happy and settling in a bottom six checking capacity. I think he's a guy that would be like very fulfilled playing NHL checking minutes, and maybe that like challenging his skill game to keep growing could be something that stagnates once he does make that jump to the NHL. But it's one of the reasons I'm so happy that he was playing like this like all out chaos offense in the Sioux this year, because he was really challenging those elements in his game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it depends on what team drafts him and
Yeah,
where he'll end up and how they will develop his game. I think, like you said, he probably should be a second line successful center or wing. But I mean, if a team stacked up the middle or even along on the wings, they might put him down in the bottom six. But the thing with Brady Martin, he's that team player that he'll do whatever you ask of him, and he's
exactly.
going to be successful. And like I said, you have a physical, hardworking, playmaking who can shoot forward. Well, you know what? Whatever the team says or asks of him, he'll do it. And that's the nice thing about Brady Martin is that this kid is going to be an NHLer 100% probably. And what is demanded of him, he'll do it.
He's so adaptable, right? Like it's one of the big reasons to go out and pick him, and especially also in terms of adapting to the NHL. The fact that he will be able to play a checking role off the bat will make that jump to the NHL game a lot smoother than for the kind of prospect that has to be playing with like a lot of puck touches in the top six in order to thrive. He's not a guy that needs that in order to be successful. But let's talk a little bit about some NHL player comps. And we have a couple names written down here. We have 3 names. I'm going to add in one more that I thought of here while we were talking.
Okay.
And kicking it off, we have Nazem Kadri of the Calgary Flames in terms of that physicality, grit, being a bit dirty sometimes when it calls for it, right? But also having a really high degree of creativity and skill and being able to create complex offensive plays. I think Martin has that kind of ceiling in him as well. Do you see the similarities between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, the thing with Kadri is that he's a player that, in Colorado was just great in the playoffs. And he,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that Martin can bring to a team as well, right? And he does have that offensive ability. So if you put him in a, second, third line, he's going to produce and he's going to be chaotic and he's going to cause havoc to other teams. So yeah, I like Nazem Kadri a lot for one of the comps for sure.
And the other one that you suggested was Mike Richards, a player that you've watched a lot of in his days as a Philadelphia Flyer. And when you talk about that comp to Mike Richards, I want to also draw in some opinions on how you'd feel about Brady Martin for the Flyers at 6th overall, because you are a Philadelphia Flyers fan after all.
Yeah, you know what? So, Mike Richards, there's another playoff player, right?
Yeah.
He was a captain of the team. He worked hard every shift. He had good pace, good compete, and Brady Martin does the exact same thing. And so, you have guys like Mishkov in Philly. So when you put a player like him on the team, it just makes everyone else around him better. And he's going to bring, that leadership quality that you need as well. He was the assistant captain on the U18s there. And so, yeah, you can't go wrong with a player like that. And we talked about that before the recording that, yeah, Philly would be a great landing spot for Brady Martin for sure.
It really would. I mean, like that would just be like the Broad Street Bullies revamped once again if they go out and pick him. But another player we have here is from the Ottawa Senators, Ridley Gregg. This is perhaps balancing it out a little bit if the upside doesn't fully hit to what we think he could become in terms of Brady Martin's potential. But if he settles in as like a third liner, especially on a contending team, in terms of energy, flexibility of playing center or wing, just plug and play wherever you need him, he can contribute. That's kind of a Brady Martin should be at a baseline, and then there's room to grow beyond that. But the last player I wanted to throw in, especially because we were talking a bit of physicality, dirty play, especially come playoff time, and I've been watching a bit of the NHL playoffs this year. Sam Bennett came to mind. Do you see those links?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, that's a great comp right there too. I mean, Sam Bennett is that he doesn't mind hitting, doesn't mind dropping the gloves. He's got a little edge to him, and Brady Martin's got that edge. And like you said, playoff time comes, that's next level. And like I said, I saw him a couple times against Windsor, and yeah, he was buzzing out there. And that's what you want. That's what you want in a player. You want an NHL player who's gonna, willing to do whatever it takes to win, and that is a great comp as well.
Amazing. So let's wrap up the show here with which NHL teams would be the best fits for Brady Martin. We already broached one of these with the Philadelphia Flyers. I think that is a pretty obvious one in terms of violence, the need for a center. I mean, Philly might be wanting to go for guys like Frondel and Desnoyers, but they may not even be available anymore come 6th overall, depending how the draft falls. I think the Blackhawks are going to have a pretty big role to play to kind of determine where the centers end up falling if they decide to go for a guy like Martone or a center down the road there on draft day. But beyond that, if it's not Philadelphia, right after that, the Boston Bruins pick. That's just like such an easy fit to see,
For
right?
sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boston, Brady Martin. I mean, come on. He's another, Philadelphia and Boston, they kind of breed similar types of hockey players. And yeah, if Martin slides and to number 7, Boston, they'll scoop him up pretty quick, I'd have to say, because that's just down their aisle.
And he'd create so much space for a guy like David Pastrnak. I think he'd love playing with Brady Martin, whether he's the center or the wing, does not matter. But last but not least, and still staying inside the top 10, so we are expecting Martin to be a top 10 pick on draft day, the Buffalo Sabres, a team that's picked a lot of centers in the last couple of years, right? Like, go down the list of Noah Östlund and Konsta Helenius and Zach Benson and who am I missing here? Yuri Kulik. You have a lot of guys that were picked down the middle here recently. for Buffalo. But what none of those guys bring is rampant physicality. And from what we learned from the Buffalo Sabres in the last year of kind of the direction that they're bringing the team in, is they want to bring in a lot more of that playoff style grit, that intensity, that physical edge. And what they don't have among their like elite level prospects is exactly that. So Brady Martin would address that area of weakness in their pool while also bring that flexibility of playing down the middle or on the wing. It doesn't matter that the center is kind of log jammed down the road for Buffalo, because you just plug in Martin wherever he fits in down the stretch. And I think he'd be a really good contributor while diversifying a little bit from just the like refined two-way center that's a little bit physically underdeveloped that Buffalo's been selecting year after year here in recent drafts. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thanks so much for joining. And Mark, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, and let the people know what you have going on right now, what you're working on. I know you're on McKeen's, right? The draft rankings are coming up. Let the people know what you have going on.
Yeah, I'm a writer for McKeen's Hockey, and we got our rankings coming out pretty soon, and I do draft profiles for them. And yeah, I also have a YouTube channel, NHL Draft Pros, do a lot of scouting reports and mock drafts and all that fun stuff. So that's where you can find me pretty much. And Sebastian, always a blast talking hockey with you. Had a great time.
Amazing. Thanks so much. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do make sure to leave us a comment down below. What are your thoughts on Brady Martin, and which team do you think should draft him? If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. And for your second listen, you're going to head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. That's everything. I'm your host, Sebastian High. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you listening again very, very soon.